What were some of your earliest experiences with faith or religious traditions or ideas about the world and life's big questions? What happens when we die and what does it all mean and that sort of thing. Do you remember kind of your earliest experiences with encountering that kind of thing and what you sort of grew up around initially?
My grandmother, I remember at a very young age, my grandmother taught us my brother and I, a few Armenian short prayers to say before we go to sleep. And for years I was saying it, and you know, when you're a kid, you're like, I mean, you don't know why you're saying it, when you're young. You just know that your grandmother cares about you and she must know something you don't, you know. And she was a sweet, sweet woman. Um, and so I remember that being my first faith related kind of thing. As I grew older, there's a few things. Knowing the history of my people as the first Christian nation was a blessing and a curse.
Mm.
As an Armenian, modern Armenian, I've realized it's a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it kept our culture alive through assimilation, attacks from the Mongols to the Ottomans, before that, the Persians and the Romans and the Greek Empire. We were in the middle of every empire, Um, we still are, unfortunately. And so it kept us who we are, it became our identity because everyone around us wasn't. They were either Zoroastrian to start with or then later on Muslim.
Yeah.
Um,
And that region also had some of the Bobbyism and the Baha'i faith and some of those
Correct.
from there too,
Yeah,
right?
I actually have a lot of Baha'i friends here in LA. But yeah, a lot of ancient, monotheistic, also multi-theistic, polytheistic, I should say, religions stemmed from the area, which is very interesting. But it was also a curse because we got persecuted for it. In a way, we still do, get persecuted for being Christian. And so so that was another realization, religion based. But as I grew older, I became more interested in the universality of all things, the truthfulness behind universality of all things. If this is true here, it should be true everywhere, And so that led me into anywhere from kind of animism to Buddhism to learning about different religions. And what I've not collated, but what I firmly believe has a lot more to do with indigenous spirituality than anything else. What Native Americans believed, what Aborigines believed. But they're all very common because they were all nature-based religions. And that basically drew characters out of our solar system, the Earth having a maternal kind of thing, the
Mhm.
sun having a paternal thing, and so, and I've always loved the combination of spirit that moves through all things and creator, two functions of one being, God, right? But I've loved them more than the word God because the word God has almost been abused historically.
Sure.
Um, that's how much I'll offer on that for now.
Yeah, fantastic. So, and this is segueing us nicely into invocations. What was life like for a young Serj at Cal State University in Northridge? The
Um,
first time around, and then we'll get
you
to
know,
coming back.
yeah. Well, it's quite interesting because when I went to Cal State Northridge in 1985 after graduating from a private Armenian high school in Hollywood, and this high school I went to, we were with the same group of kids, the 30-something group of kids for God, probably 10, 15 years,
Mhm.
So I knew we had the same friends, like, because we all grew up together and we didn't know that many people outside of that group. We were very sheltered and isolated. So when I went to Northridge, my first thing was, oh my God, the world is so big. Like look at all these people, look at all these beautiful women, look at all these opportunities at learning things. Look at, like, my whole world opened up, going to university. So that to me was the first awakening, like, in terms of that. At the time, I was it's kind of funny because either the first year or the second year I was going there is the first time I actually picked up a musical instrument. And it was a small Casio keyboard, the ones with the smaller keys that you can't even play if you've got stubby fingers, right? Um, so it was a form of meditation for me because I had a lot going on at the time, not just school, but work and family issues and so many different things. And so it became my escape. The keyboard became my escape. And I never thought of it as a career at that time until I graduated with a business degree, went and worked in the world for a number of years, and music kept just gnawing at me. You know, come back. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you crazy? You don't want to do this? Like, you know, it was the, you know, voice in the back of the head that kept on reminding me of what I should be doing until I openly admitted to that being my vision and changed the whole course of my life.
Yeah, brilliant. See how we tied that together without even trying? That's fantastic.
Yeah, totally.
So the record and the performance has been described as, you know, music that calls on spirits to co-inspire or interspire. Can you tell me about that? Kind of elaborating on those ideas and you know, in some ways, I'm sure it's metaphorical. The idea of literally calling on supernatural spirits or the unseen world, but at the same time, you know, I think even the most sort of secular, for lack of a better term, of those in your audience, I mean, everyone's experienced some kind of moving something
Yeah.
bigger than us or outside of us or joining all of us with music, you know, at a show, at a concert, at a, you know, at a theater, watching a great film, reading a good book. So what does that mean to you? I guess more sort of in however broad you want to go or however granular you want to get when you
Yeah.
talk about invoking spirits and kind of
As,
commingling.
as you kind of hinted, music is a transcendental medium. And as artists, our food is inspiration and our output is inspiration, right? For others, you know? So we chew on inspiration and then we release something else out as inspiration that inspires others. So it's co-inspirational. You know, one thing inspires another person inspires another, it multiplies. But when I was talking to the Soraya Theater and they said, with this music, I mean, what is different? Like, what is it about this music that you feel? And I remember myself saying, if the spirit was something physical inside your body, I would put my hand inside your throat and pull it out just to the edge of your physical being without taking it out of you. That's what I'm trying to do with this music. And they were like, fuck, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, so it's kind of like, you could use the word moving, but that's kind of undercutting it. It's more like kind of really kind of, you know, taking it to a point where you forget about physicality, you know, like, and that sounds very ambitious, of course, but I think in the right setting, with the right motivation, the right stimuli on stage, that's what we were able to accomplish with this one unique audience. And I didn't want to do more than one night. It was a sold out show. And I was like, one night only, they offered me more nights. I'm like, no, let's make it really special. Let's record the whole thing. I want it to be like a musical seance in a way, you know, that we just live there and then we leave it, you know, and we can share it as a record, video, whatever, with the world. Yeah.
And then it would conjure those same ideas and feelings you know, I mean, because that's what's beautiful about art, right? Is that it's conjuring, it's manifesting a certain thing as you're creating it, either by yourself or then as you collaborate with other people, and then as you're performing it, and then once it's recorded and it's listened to, it's like it has all these different opportunities where it's the same work, but it almost transforms depending on the medium or the listener, you know.
Yeah, I over time I remember, you know, you can chant, like chanting takes you to this kind of metaphysical plane, right? But you can also scream at the gods, which is what we do with System of a Down and bands similar, where you're breaking through this kind of glass ceiling of agony or frustration. And, you know, I tried to do all of that in one show. You know, you've got a death metal singer that's just fucking like this voice coming in that's making you feel something else, almost uncomfortable. I wanted to add that edge of
provoking and inspiring.
provoking. Yeah, yeah. So, you know, the beauty with the darkness, the, you know, our tenor, his voice, Brian Thorsett, fucking, you know, the most powerful voice I've ever heard in my life. He made all of us look like mice next to him, like voice wise, you know, like when he'd sing during rehearsals and workshops, all of us would look at each other, all us soloists, the orchestra, everyone would just go, the fuck is that? Like, you know, it was just like,
You're like, do you need the rest of us to leave? We can leave if you want to just,
amazing, amazing. Even like my mom saw this show, my mom and dad saw this show, which was amazing. And my mom's like, that guy's voice, I've never heard anything like that. I'm like, I know, that's why I got him. Like, I've never heard, it's an alien, you know? Like, so it was like, I was very lucky because I was able to find these people with these unique voices that are so diverse, you know, like I've never seen a death metal singer and an opera singer and a world singer and an alto and myself and a choir doing weird things with an orchestra and ethnic instruments ever.
No, and that's this ambitious, but also that doesn't sound, because even when you describe it like that, if you look at it on a piece of paper, it almost sounds like it would be jumbled or like a compilation or something. But somehow the whole of it is very singular. I feel like it does have a distinct voice.
It is, and it was very challenging, to be honest, Ryan, because there's multiple languages and there's also a lot of gibberish where I just wrote things with whatever enunciation I wanted to at the time, vocally, but I didn't want to change it to a language because once you start changing that, each phrase loses something. Like you can't, you know, if you go, oh, yeah, you know, like that doesn't mean anything. But if you go, I need you, like that's not the same. Sorry. Like you can't, like you, so I couldn't, there's no way I could translate that. So I'm like, let's leave the gibberish. Let's leave the language, whatever language they are. We're gonna go as is. And they looked at me like, how are all the singers gonna learn this? I'm like, we'll figure it out, you know, that kind of a thing. And of course, the singers were incredible, and they surpassed my expectations. And so that didn't become an issue ultimately. And I also gave them free room to improvise to a certain extent as well. Because if you're doing gibberish, you can't remember the exact phraseology, the phrasing. So, you know, there's a certain improvisation to that as well. So if we ever do the show again, it's never going to be the same.
Right.
Which is cool. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that often goes unsaid about one of the challenges of being a songwriter, particularly a singer, a front person, is that, you know, you can start with kind of the poetry on the page, and then you're trying to figure out a way to contort those words to fit to this piece of music. And so it inevitably has to change in a certain way. Or you're doing the opposite, where you're sort of, you know, like we've heard a lot of the Metallica demos where Hetfield's doing the na 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 na, and you're just kind of getting the patterns and everything.
Yeah.
But then you're having to force words into those. And
Right.
so in either direction, yeah, that's something that doesn't really get talked about that often, but in either direction it is changing something, and optimistically it's gaining something through that process. But
And I think with songs you probably do, you know, I do the same thing. When I come out, I'm just singing a melody. Sometimes words creep in, and you know those creeping in words are, you know, the universe trying to tell you what the topic is about. Like it's giving you a clue.
Yeah.
Oh, it's about that. Okay. So those words go, okay, maybe this is the story based on these 5 words that creeped in through the, you know, gibberish that just you were singing the melody, trying to figure out the melody to.
That's making the hair stand up on my arms. Yeah, because I mean, it's where that's that idea when you hear people say like, "Oh, I'm channeling it." It's like it's coming from somewhere else. I mean, I believe that's real, especially.
Sure. I mean, I didn't have musical education. I didn't even know I was going to do music while I was at CSUN. So yeah. I fully believe in that channeling, if you will.
One thing I was thinking about, and I forgive me for even bringing up the song, because I understand it's a little bit like, you know, talking to Skinnerd about Freebird, but I was out somewhere last night where I heard Chop Suey for like the gazillionth time. But in thinking about this conversation we were going to be having today, I was struck by and reminded of something that I've connected with your work from the beginning and throughout everything you've been part of, which is that you have this gift or this insistence even to juxtapose the mundane and familiar with the political and material with this like spiritual yearning that in my mind it is very subversive because it sneaks in to songs that are otherwise seemingly about something else. And more recently, I think it was as Rick Rubin was promoting his book and doing interviews for that, he told this anecdote about uh you know arguably the best line of that song, and that coming out of a book from one of his trippy Rick Rubin bookshelf library. So yeah, and I also, forgive me because there's not so much a question in here as a comment, I guess, which now I'm that person that's like, I don't have a
All
question or a
right.
comment, but
That's right. We haven't chatted in a while, so it's good.
yeah, well, yeah, thanks. But yeah, I would just be curious to hear sort of your perspective on because I mean now you're an established artist. People understand where you're coming from and what to expect, and those of us who have picked up on that aspect of what you do are in tune with it. But especially early on, and especially coming in like a metal aggressive environment, going on tour with bands like Slayer. At some point in the last year, I came across a video on YouTube of System opening for Slayer. And
Oh
it was like,
shit!
somebody's
I'd
like,
love to see it.
I'll have to send it to you. Yeah, it's like it's intense, man. It's killer, and it's
We were fucking scared, bro, on stage.
dude, it's like the back lines behind you, where it's the thing where you've got like just a couple inches of space, and and no one
Yeah,
knows who
it
you
was
are.
tough. It was boot camp, just
Yeah,
like surviving, learning
yeah,
how to work an audience, and
yeah.
'cause Slayer audiences will hate everyone else,
Of
obviously.
course, it's like a maiden
And
audience, or there's a handful of bands where it's like they're just at best they're like patiently waiting for you to be done.
basically, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But that was, I mean, that brings back a lot of memories, but because it was our first tour as well.
yeah,
And Darren was all glammed out. I had like weird shit on my face, and like, yeah, they would look at us like, what the fuck are these fucking idiots,
yeah.
like, and we had to impress from like not just base 0 point but negative point. Like we had to get up there and score points. And that, my friend, was incredible boot camp as touring artists. That really, really kind of made us. It molded us. It
You
was
can
great.
feel it in this performance that I watched, and you can feel the audience coming around progressively.
Yeah,
Just because it's like it's irresistible. And there's some great whoever was filming it followed you into the dressing room immediately afterwards, and so you get a little bit of that
that's cool.
it's pretty cool.
That's
um
right.
but the idea of kind of subversively sneaking in this spiritual, esoteric, universalist these ideas and these messages and this contemplation, um how difficult was that in the beginning, and was there pushback to that? Was that something that people were responding to, or responding against? Or even within the band, I would imagine it would be hard to be like, by the way, I'm going to put a bunch of this stuff is in our metal song, guys.
Right, right. We never. That's one great thing about System is we never questioned things that just came out of us. We never thought about them. Um, it's kind of interesting. There were a few points I've talked about, like few songs where we had changed the lyrics based on certain insecurities within the band or whatever. But generally, especially regarding mixing themes, topics, lyrics, there was never any question, because our music is as Dada-esque as our lyrics are. So
Yeah,
they,
that's
you
true.
know,
Yeah.
so they matched. It never became an issue. Um, and it's all a part of life. Like I've said, you don't spend all day on one emotion. You have multiple emotions throughout the day, and most people will have different records for those emotions. We have one song with all those emotions, right?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and I love horror films. I love comedy, but I watch lots of genres. I'll
that's
watch a
right. Yeah, you have
drama.
to.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar. Um, So I wanted to ask you also,
By the way, horror is comedy for me. Most horror is very, very grit. Like it's at
yeah,
that point where it goes, and the director knows it. It's at that point where they break this wall where it just becomes so over the top that you just stop laughing. You're just like, you're okay, lad, this is fucking, you're just laughing like crazy.
and I feel like it's a way for us, psychologically, spiritually, to confront. I mean, certainly, there's the idea that so much of our time, our distractions, our devices, our interpersonal relationships, so much of it is distracting from our mortality, right? And this knowing that there's some kind of something, whether it just stops or whether we continue. And I think horror, this is really something I've just come to in the last year or so. As I wrote a 100-page horror story, which is a whole other conversation. But
Oh,
in doing that, and I have one of the characters actually says this in a scene. Uh, Horror is our way of kind of laughing at the abyss. Like taking those deepest, darkest fears and putting the most extreme example of it in front of us and being like, look at this, and
totally.
I looked at it, I laughed at it, I carried
Yeah,
on with my day, and
you got over it.
got power in that.
You got over the idea of death. I mean, that is what that's amazing.
Yeah, hopefully, optimistically. And that leads me to my last question about this record, which is that at some point, whatever awaits in the great beyond, or any sort of unification of spirit, or whatever happens when the material is transitions for us. I have to imagine you would hope that your spirit would be a spirit someone can invoke and call upon to create and collaborate on a record like this.
Wow, thank you.
It's like interview 101, not to ask a yes or no question, but that's kind of a yes or no question. But I assume that's something you would want or you would welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, that's the whole co-inspirational thing. Is like, I get inspired to do something. I want to inspire. That's the litmus test of success for a suite of work, is that inspiration, the strength of that inspiration, whatever you're putting out, So it's, sure, who doesn't like selling records, which no one does anyway, but like, who doesn't like a lot of streams, I should say, or who doesn't like a lot of attention, or making money from your art. I'm thankful to have been doing it and do it no matter what I do. So I think that, to me, that's what it is. If I was to measure something, is how much can I move you? It's like a horror film, right? How much can I scare you? That's how you measure success of a horror film. Yes, okay, you could say it brought in more numbers, box office number, great. Okay, we know what that is. But the cult ones, the cult success ones, are the ones, how much did I scare you, right? It's the same with this. It's like, how much have I moved you? How much have I taken that spirit out of you? And just that, to me, is really interesting. It's all a human experiment. Music plays this incredible role that is so unique for our lives. A memory tool, a meditation tool, and so many different things. And it could do so many.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
crossing language barriers and cultural barriers. And yeah, and I have to give you credit. You mentioned the record sales and streams and everything. You were the first creative public figure, for lack of a better phrase, to say that, talk about hologram performances.
All right.
And of course, it's kind of,
remember that.
and to think about, like, Tupac and Dio and things that have happened, like literal holograms. But I would argue that you unwittingly or not predicted what happened during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because that was exactly what you were describing. When you have a band in one location broadcasting out to fans all around the world, that singular performance that's now shared by, it was literally what you said then that some people laughed at, like the idea of it, and every band
did it. Like there's so many, Christina Aguilera, like there's so many of those. But the way I had it in mind is still not done that much. It hasn't been one performance with one audience with a two-way non-latency line where they see you, you see them, and if
Mm.
someone throws anything, you duck.
That's the next step.
That's the next step. It's still, that was my vision, and that
Yeah.
still hasn't happened. Maybe we'll do it. Maybe we'll
The,
do it.
the closest to that is during the pandemic, I went to a stand-up comedy show
Uh-huh.
where the comedians were in a room surrounded by like a wall of TV screens.
Yep.
And then the audience members, each of our faces were on an individual TV screen. So
Right.
as they're telling the jokes, they can see us reacting and laughing, and people could heckle.
That's cool.
But
That's
yeah,
cool.
it was close. It still couldn't throw something, but
Yeah.
it did have that more of that two-way interaction.
That's all.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for making the time and for reaching out to do this. It's always my pleasure.
My pleasure, brother. Good to see you. I'm
Yeah,
glad you're doing
likewise.
well.